Many of you out there are under the illusion that life is a marathon. And I'm here to shatter that illusion for you, because the truth is, it's not a marathon, right? It's a relay race. That's how you lay plans for thousands of years down the line. You understand that it's not you that's going to be crossing the finish line, right? It's other people, right? And the baton is information. It could be literal information or it could be genetic information. Either way, it's a relay race. All you have to simply do is ask yourself how you got here. It was because of somebody else. Now I'll ask you this. If you had the ability to see the future, would you want to? Do you guys ever have moments where you feel like you're tapped in? And when I say tapped in, like not just particularly tapped into the task that you're doing at the time, but you have access to a certain sense of intuition about the reality you exist in. And you will do things, you will see things and be able to interpret information before events occur. Now, I'm not saying you can see the future at any stretch of the imagination, although it kind of sounds cool to think, oh yeah, I can see the future. What I think is happening, right, which is just like, I'm just giving you like some ideas to think about, right? Very much how you exist is all loops, open loops, closed loops, open loops, closed loops, right? Same kind of scenarios happening over and over again, just in a small little variance. And because of that, your subconscious mind, and for some of you, your conscious mind, is always recording and calculating all these little different variants in realities and scenarios, right? And you psychologically built up a database of what could potentially happen and what might happen. We call that safeguarding or troubleshooting, right? Where you could think about what the problem might be and go through all these different steps and see what the problem is going to be before it actually gets to its highest potential, right? Or risk assessment. That's one half of that intuition, right? The other half of that intuition is the intercepting of the energy before it occurs. Now that sounds real woo-woo, right? Because I ain't got the best vocabulary to portray what I'm trying to say. But think about it like this. There's a word called the zeitgeist, right? Which basically means being able to put your finger on the pulse of what is happening around you and the times, right? If you are somebody that kind of is a little bit belligerent, but you're a little bit clued up at the same time, because like the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? You don't actually know how much you don't know kind of thing, but you know just enough to know that you don't know, right? If you're a little bit clued up in reality, you know you stay away from certain levels of indoctrination and influence, right? It could just be these particular people, you don't let their ideas cross a certain barrier in your mind, or their rhetoric, or their subjectivity of how they perceive life. And it could be a thing like where I only ingest media from these sources, right? And when I do, I have a certain level of filter that has to cut through all of that bullshit so I can interpret what they want me to see. Because as somebody that is like an amateur in media creation, I understand a lot of the processes that go on behind it, right? And even though I'm a very just get up and go kind of guy, there's still a certain level of planning that happens, even for me and my spontaneousness. So on a large scale, right, on a real media, real videos, real movies, real TV programming and music making, everything is meticulously planned out, right, and put in certain places for certain times, right? Now, if I want to send a certain message to a certain group of people, I just have to make a certain kind of little, whatever it is, and they understand the message, but everyone else doesn't see the message. So in that kind of way, you have a filter in your mind too, so you can see what you want to see, and you can also see what they want you to see, right? Now, back to the feeling of being tapped in and that intuition, right? There's that intuition that I said where it could be a little bit woo-woo, right? Where it's like, oh, am I tapped into the energy? I know what's going to happen before it happens. And then there's the logical. There's all these things keep happening cyclically, right? So you can actually determine this should happen after that, right? Because when that happens, this usually occurs. It might not go like that, but your database will just get updated of now this is a new potential thing that can happen once A happens, right?
When things are nice and neat and tidy, they are low entropy. When they're all messy and all over the place, they're high entropy. And there's a natural tendency of things in the universe to go from low entropy to high entropy. This is called the second law of thermodynamics. The real question is, why was the universe even lower entropy the day before yesterday? Because it was even lower entropy the day before that. And this chain of reasoning goes back 14 billion years to the Big Bang, to the origin of our observable universe in a hot, dense state, a very low entropy state, and the universe has been increasing in entropy ever since. And this is called the past hypothesis. So now we say, if you know that the world is made of atoms, and you know what entropy is in terms of rearranging all those atoms, and you know the past hypothesis, that the entropy of the universe started really low, then you can explain everything that happened after that. What would it mean if entropy were not increasing? It would mean that nothing is happening. Nothing interesting is taking place. Without entropy increasing, there's no memory of the past. Without entropy increasing, there's no causal effect that we have on the future. You'd just be in what we call thermal equilibrium. Everything would be the same everywhere. It would be the maximally boring universe. But what we do have is a scientific question is, why do complicated, complex structures come into existence at all? It's clear that they need increasing entropy to exist, because if entropy were already maxed out, there would be no complexity. But that doesn't mean they have to come into existence. Think about the famous example where the perfume is all in a little bottle, it's in a big room, you open it, and it all floats through the room. The entropy of the perfume increases. But if you think about it, when the perfume is all in the bottle, it's very simple. Once it's all spread through the room, it's also very simple. It went from low entropy to high entropy, but it went from simple to simple. It's the journey from the simple low entropy starting point to the simple high entropy ending point, that there's a large space of possibilities where things can be intricate. There's more perfume here, over there. There can be swirls caused by the motion of the wind in the room and so forth.
Truthfully, you understanding that this happens usually happens in hindsight, right? Because when you're in the moment, you don't know. You don't really know it. Unless you're like I say, unless you're like super tapped in, which sounds woo-woo, right? And I'm not even a woo-woo guy like that, right? You usually interpret this in hindsight, and you see actually the work I just done there, right? In about a week or so, in about a day or two, right? The reality that we live in is going to catch up to that, right? It might be a year, it might be 10 years, but the reality that you're in is going to catch up to that idea, right? Now, this is just how ideas work. If you talk to someone like Rick Rubin, he has a perspective like ideas just exist in the ether and they come to people at a certain time. And if you don't take the idea, someone else is going to take the idea. Now, that's kind of music talk for shit gets stolen, right? But anyway, I don't know this, no knock to Rick, because Rick definitely knows how shit goes down. But that same thing of you put something down in reality, right? You bring it to fruition from your mind and you put it here in reality. It could be an idea, it could be a conversation, it could be a piece of work, right? It could be a document, anything, right? I'm not saying there's special people in reality that this happens to and no one else it happens to, because chances are it happens to everybody, but my little specific worldview is capturing it in a certain light. You'll put this thing down, right? Or you'll be working on it and you'll have it there, and you'll notice it takes a certain amount of time for reality or other individuals to catch up to the same idea, the same perspective, or sometimes it's just factual information, and you'll be like, I thought everybody else knew this because this was obvious, that was obvious. That's your cyclical database being like, boop, 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 boop. This is going to happen because all of these things have happened, right? And you think, oh, everyone else has kind of determined that based on deductive reasoning, or they've deduced that this is going to happen because they know this too, right? But you don't realize they don't have this database and this way of interpreting the information that you do, right?
Precognition is the ability to see future events before they happen. But what if we don't consider time linearly? As beings with 5 senses, we perceive time as one flow moving forward. But in fact, time can bend and change. Imagine that our mind can perceive time both consistently, as it does now while you're watching this video, and also in the opposite direction, or slow motion. Our feelings and perception of the world can jump forward in time and come back. This way, we might feel what will happen in the future. But perhaps you can't grasp this concept yet. So let's look at Daryl Bem's experiments, part of his study called Feeling the Future. He connected several sensors to a person's head and arm. They read the pulse and magnetic changes in the brain. The device worked on the principle of the lie detector. Then the person watched a slideshow of regular pictures on the screen. Like the person sees a mountain landscape, a bonfire, a horse, a newspaper, an open book, and then bam, the screen shows a really shocking image. A turned off TV, a cup of tea, a cloud, and bam, another shocking picture. And the subject's brain reacted to this image again. Nothing unusual at first glance, but the professor discovered that the human brain began to react to shocking images even before they appeared on the screen. At some level of intuition, the subject's body seemed to predict them before the computer decided which picture to show.
I don't want to give an example of this because it will make me sound kind of crazy, right? Which I'm fine with. But in the context of what I'm talking about, I want you to interpret it and take it logically, right? Not woo-woo. So, times where you put something in the world, right, and you'll see, this is the information. Now, some people interpret this in a targeted individual gang stalking way, like, oh, this is just, people are street theatering and acting out the things that I'm talking about and the work that I'm doing. So they're seeing what I'm doing and then reacting to what I'm doing to bring it into reality, which is a part of it. But there's a subconscious part of it that is also working on you, right? Which you could call like You could call it God, you could call it the universe as a puppet master pulling the strings, the ether, whatever you want to call it, right? Certain things need to happen at certain times for certain outcomes, right? But a lot of the time, if you are somebody that's either part of some kind of creative work or part of trying to change reality for the better, you will notice the things you do have an effect, but they don't have an instantaneous effect, right? Because I don't even believe in karma, because too many bad things happen to good people, too many good things happen to bad people, right? So karma for me is out the window. But the cause and effect idea is, it resonates.
Newton was the first to come up with a set of laws that allow us to predict the motion of all objects in the universe. Newton's revelations led to the notion of the deterministic universe, the idea that by knowing the current position and velocity of every particle in the universe, as well as the forces that act between those particles, you could calculate all future and past states of the universe. Newton's picture of the universe included one other assumption that we know for sure is wrong. It included the idea of an absolute, clearly definable now. Newton assumed that all particles, all observers, all points in space were ruled by a single constantly ticking clock. This universal clock meant it was possible to define a notion of now that everyone would agree on, and so everyone would also agree on what was the past and what was the future. Although that perception of existing at a single instant in time is definitely an illusion. Our awareness, in fact our conscious existence, is sort of smeared out over a couple of hundred milliseconds. But that's a topic for another, well, time.
Cause and effect seems like the most likely principle that runs this kind of intuition of what's going to happen in the future, right? You could call it predictive programming, you could just call it straight up planning and strategizing and knowing X is going to happen and Y, right? And I know like people like to talk in terms of chess, but trust me, you're not Magnus Carlsen and you don't really understand chess like that. So for you, let's not bother doing that. Interpreting it in the form of cause and effect is much simpler, right? But the big problem with that is if you do accept that it's cause and effect that allows you to have this intuition or this knowing of what's going to happen in the future, you also have to accept that all of the woo-woo stuff you subjectively believe because of like a higher power or God or whatever kind of rules and books you believe in goes out of the window, right? When you do this kind of stuff, right, it's very easy to get lost in the rabbit hole of insanity, right? Because very much a lot of what I'm speaking about requires you to tap into a certain part of humanity that scares a lot of people, right? And it's not magical, it's nothing more than psychological, right? And it requires you to either have a break in reality or perceiving reality, which is called psychosis or being psychopathic, or obtain and digest a certain amount of information so you can actually look at things principally and logically and not separate them from the world you're living in right now. So what has all of this actually got to do with anything, right? That intuition, that subjective thought of interpreting your work in reality, right? And then the actual data set of things you know to be true, so you know X is going to happen, Y is going to happen preceding, right? All comes into play when you're talking about predicting the future, right? Knowing the future before it happens. Being able to lay out certain guidelines, certain formats of reality. It could be in word form, it could be in media form, it could be painting, it could be the fact that you prune a tree at a certain time so X happens and Y happens, right? This is all a part of being a human, which is what separates us from most animals, right? Our ability to perceive and plan and judge, right? All of that, as woo-woo as it sounds, does to some extent unlock the ability to see the future, right? But the problem with that is you create the future because only now exists, right? Only now exists, right? Only now exists, right?
There's a name for this idea that all of time, future and past sort of just exists in this atemporal structure. It's eternalism. The opposite viewpoint would be presentism, which posits that only the current instant has a meaningful existence, and the past is erased and the future still blank. The middle viewpoint would be that of the growing block. That's the idea that this shock front of the present creates the block universe as it proceeds forward, sort of weaving the past out of nothing. The representation of the block universe that I showed you is very Newtonian. We had a single time axis that everyone agreed on, and everyone agreed what slice of the block was currently the present, and which sides were the future or the past. Newton says there's only one way to slice the universe, but Einstein says otherwise. In his special theory of relativity, Einstein showed that there's no absolute way to define whether two events happen simultaneously. The present, past, and future are relative concepts. How do we even say what now means for other parts of the universe? Nothing, not even information, can travel faster than light. That means any distant event is already in the past by the time we see it. We represent the region of the block universe that we can possibly perceive with a light cone. Signals from things inside that cone have had time to reach us. The boundary of the cone holds the paths of light speed signals. Whatever events live on that cone represent the universe that we see around us, carried to us by light. Any event above that cone is unseeable in the present. We have to wait until our light cone moves upwards to encompass it, which is the same as saying we have to wait until its light has had time to reach us. Our entire time slice of our present is never observable in the present. To map it, we need to wait.
So you create the future by the things you do in the past, right? But the thing is, when you can interpret the events that are to come, it doesn't mean you can interpret your particular individual future, right? You may be able to interpret the future of a particular situation, maybe the outcome for a country, maybe the outcome for a business proposition. All these kinds of things you can interpret, right? Part of it is subjective, but the other part of it is objective because of the data set, right? Because of the accumulation of information, knowing how humans work, knowing how society moves, the cycles, what things represent. And like I was saying in the beginning, if I show you this list of things, there's a message in that only 10 of you, right, and I'm only holding up 5, can understand, right? Do you get what I'm saying? But the rest of you won't see it. But the 10 of you that understood what I just put up, that's like a genetic meme that only you will understand, right? So therefore, your database is being informed on different information to everybody else's database. Knowing that, when you're more guarded of your database psychologically, what you ingest and what you don't ingest, you can't move with the sheep, with the herd, with the wave of the water, right?
This city's afraid of me. I've seen its true face. The streets are extended gutters, and the gutters are full of blood. And when the trains finally scab over, all the vermin will drown. The accumulated filth of all their sex and murder will foam up around their waists. And all the whores and politicians will look up and shout, "Save us." And I'll whisper, "No."
The things that are supposed to matter, right, that you're told are supposed to matter, won't matter because you understand conceptually, because of this database of information I have and the history of the people being controlled and swayed and moved this way and that way, you know there's no reason for you to partake in this particular agenda or this particular idea because you know the preceding information and then what the outcome will be, right? I'm trying very hard not to speak on current events, right? Because it's not necessary, because this particular political climate that we're in now is not new, right? It's part of that same data set that I'm talking about. These are tactics that have been deployed before and they know the outcome should be a similar outcome, right? So once you're aware of that, you don't buy in, you don't participate, right? You know the information sources that you ingest need to be able to contribute to you changing or participating in the future outcome, right, in your favor. Like I'm not saying you have an enemy or anything, but just thinking about it in strategy, you'll be able to predict what your opponent is going to do next, right? And they become very typical because they lean on the understanding of things that have preceded, right? So that gives you a certain insight into the future. Now, some people use this certain insight or intuition in the business world with stock markets and companies and shit. Some people use it in a creative world, like this particular sound, these instruments, this movie setup is going to work for this, which is coming in the future, right? We're laying the bricks for what's coming, right? Now, many of you out there are under the illusion that life is a marathon. And I'm here to shatter that illusion for you because the truth is, it's not a marathon, right? It's a relay race. That's how you lay plans for thousands of years down the line. You understand that it's not you that's going to be crossing the finish line, right? It's other people, right? And the baton is information. It could be literal information or it could be genetic information. Either way, it's a relay race. All you have to simply do is ask yourself how you got here. It was because of somebody else. Now I'll ask you this. If you had the ability to see the future, would you want to?